In our last study on Wednesday evening, or I guess it was a Sunday morning, we switched our classes and we haven't had a class in Ezekiel since the last time we discussed about valley dry bones, but also coming into the idea, the latter part of that chapter, the two sticks. And we hit on that a little bit. I just want us to bring us up to date. In the 36th chapter, that's the beginning of this lesson, number 8, you have God not prophesying to the people, not prophesying to the nations. He's prophesying to the mountain of Israel. And I'm not saying it's not involve the people, but in this section, it's the land that's going to be fruitful again. And the land he's prophesying unto the land, not to Israel, to the land, but Israel's involved. But I think it's just interesting when you follow the thoughts of Ezekiel, when he's talking about the land, there's a reason for that. He adds then the valleys. He adds then the watercourses. He adds in the desolate places. He adds in the cities that are forsaken. Why are they forsaken? People leave. The desolation that happens unto all of them. And the whole point is that you have profaned my name because you left the land. And we saw that in the 36th chapter, that indeed the land was forsaken and therefore the nations profaned the name of God. Apparently God's not that strong. He gave this land to the people and they have left it. Therefore his name was profaned. God's name was profaned with the Israelites because they went after the idols, idolatrous nations, following after them. And therefore he had taken them into captivity. But as we see here in this chapter 37 and 38 and 39, it's the idea that people are going to come back. And what he sees in chapter 37 is the fact of a valley of very dry bones. Not just dry bones, but very dry bones. And what he's going to do, he was going to be able to, as he prophesies now over the bones. He prophesied unto the land, chapter 36, over the bones, and he's going to bring life to them. There's going to be tendons, sinews brought together. I'll put skin over you, and I'll breathe into you by my spirit, and you will live. You will live. And we begin to realize that indeed this is the idea of the life being brought back to the people who are very dry bones. We don't have any hope. There is no hope. It's very dry bones. How could anything come from that? So when he prophesied over the bones, he brought life back to them. And I ask a point here is that what is a similar picture you have in the New Testament of this very thing? Because it's not literal. It's the fact that these individuals, people are going to be brought back to life. That's not the part that's literal. It's the idea your hope is going to be restored. Your cause is going to be restored. So you're not completely without hope. Very dry bones. Only God could do this to bring it back. But you're prophesying over those bones that God's Spirit will revive them. They will have a revision of their cause. They're God's people. And God will indeed bring that about. Now my question is, where do we see that in the New Testament? Turn with me to Revelation. And we'll notice that indeed he sees in Revelation 20 and verse 4, I saw the souls of them that had been beheaded for the testimony of Christ and for the word of God, and as such as worship not the beast neither his image. What happened to them? Have you ever seen a soul beheaded? I've seen a person beheaded, a precious soul. People were literally put to death. And they stood for the cause of Christ. What's going to happen? I saw the souls of them have been beheaded and so forth. And then he says, and those that have received not the mark that forehead upon their hand, they don't serve the idols, and they lived, and they reigned how long? Their cause is revived. And for a period of time, which is 1,000 years, not literal 1,000 years, but 1,000 years of a complete time where God has set forth his peace to his people, they reign. They're victorious because their cause is brought back. when they had to put their head on a chopping block and they were beheaded for the cause of Christ. We've defeated you. Look at your head. You're nothing. No, I didn't submit myself to the beast, mark of the beast. That's why you didn't do business with me in the book of Revelation. That's why I didn't have a lot of money, because I was outcasted by the powers that be. God revives them. And so he reigns for 1,000 years. And then that's not utopia where it says that's the way it's going to be forever. Because we got Gog and Magog. And where are we going to learn about them? Chapter 38 and chapter 39. The land's going to come back and be fruitful. And we're going to see the valley of the dry bones, your cause being my people, going to be revived. I'm going to bring you back into your land. I'm going to renew your cause. And in Revelation 20, this is the first resurrection. You will not be hurt by the second death. It wasn't a literal resurrection. It wasn't the first resurrection. We're all going to come from the grave. It's the first resurrection. They died for the cause. And it looked like they were defeated, but their cause is revived, and they reign in victory. But it doesn't stay that way. You got Gog and Magog. And it's interesting, John puts it together for us too. In Revelation, we'll come back to it. But right now, we just got Ezekiel 37. Before we get into Ezekiel 38 and verse 39, Revelation should be a part to say, well, why would you go over there? It's apocalyptic literature. What are we studying in Ezekiel? And if you don't think, well, it's just all literal prose. No, you wait till we start seeing the sacrifice that the God's people are going to eat before God, and God commands it. And he's not being mean to them. You begin to realize, what's the imagery there? And it's beautiful when you approach the Bible in the way it's written, and not say, well, I've got to look at it literal. Well, we usually do. But this type of literature is the cause. It's like it's very dry bones. And we're going to see kind of what happens to purify the land as well. So I'm saying it's the book of Revelation. The idea of after all the persecution, God revives his people. It's not the end of the world yet. And we see that as Revelation unfolds. Now we come to question number 9. We talked a little bit about this, but I want to go back over it, so it's been a while. What do the 2 sticks represent? In chapter 37, verses 15 through 17. And those of you who are here and remember that, if you remember that far back, hey, maybe you're proud. Anybody want, you'll read it? What's one stick? Judah. That's got you right on there, Judah. And his companions. That's going to be Israel. And then take another stick and write up on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim. Why would that be of Joseph and put on the stick of Ephraim? When Joseph was in captivity himself, before the famine came, which would be 7 years of hardship, before the famine came and everything was so great, Joseph had 2 sons. And the first son was Manasseh, meaning he made me forget the toil in Egypt. And always, he made me forget my house too. What happened at his house that got Joseph over here in Egypt? They're jealous, and they sold him and lied to their dad. Overcame the toil of that too. Then he had Ephraim. What does Ephraim mean? Fruitful, fruitful, abundantly fruitful. And Manasseh doesn't become the main tribe in Israel. Ephraim does. And Ephraim is multiples of what Manasseh was, and that became connected with the northern kingdom of Israel. And the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Israel, that's what these 2 sticks are. Now, I say that because our Mormon friends, when you study with them, and I have, over this issue, I know what classroom I was in the day that happened. They came to church. and had a study. One was one of their leaders. And they bring up the fact that indeed Ezekiel's 2 sticks is totally different what you think. And here is Boyd Packer. He's dead now. There's been a number of the presidents of the apostles. They have, but they had the quorum of the 12 apostles. They're keeping the 12 apostles alive, and here's the one that's giving the information. He says the stick or record of Judah is indeed the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, just to say that, what did you read in chapter 37? These are kingdoms. It's Judah and Ephraim. The northern, how the northern kingdom was set forth was indeed those of people that comprise that northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom is Judah. You don't have to. Well, it's great. I don't understand that. You know it, and he continues to say that there's 2 nations. They've been 2 divided kingdoms, and I'm going to make one kingdom. And I'm going to set over them David as their king, and he will rule forever. And we're going to find out, I wonder who that king is. And if you didn't read anything, who would you think the king of David would be in the latter days after Israel comes back, or Judah, Israelites come back from captivity? I wonder who, because David's in his grave, isn't he? David is going to reign. I wonder who that one king is. Got any ideas? Jesus, I hope so. Acts 2, and indeed Isaiah 9, fulfilled prophecy. One nation, one shepherd, one fold, one nation, one king, who will rule forever, Daniel 9. We'll talk about that. David, you want to wait till then, or you want to say something now? Yeah.
So that was certain it's talking about the same time. And it's still because they couldn't think of how that could fit.
That's right. So when you read chapter 37, and we just have the highlights of it, you'll see that. But here's what they're saying. So the stick of the record of Judah, there is your Old and New Testaments. And the stick of the record of Ephraim, it says what? It's the book of what? Mormon. That's the way it is. It's the book of Mormon. Look what it does, which is another testament of Jesus Christ. If you hear an angel from heaven tell you any other gospel than that which you received, let him be what? Praised, because they're Mormons and they feel it right here. They're saved, and you're not. No, let him be anathema. So it's just another testament of Jesus Christ, and are woven together in such a way that when you pull over one, you're drawn to the other. That's why we go to the Book of Mormon. It's just another testament of Jesus. I don't need another testament of Jesus. The faith was once and for all delivered. But no, it helps complete the picture. And you learn from one, you're enlightened by the other. I'm enlightened that this is a false teaching. That's what I'm enlightened about. They are indeed one in our hands. Oh, it's beautiful. It's just so beautiful the way the Bible comes together, doesn't it? It's all in one hands. And Ezekiel's prophecy does what? It stands fulfilled. Thank you, Joseph Smith. Ezekiel's prophecy will never be fulfilled without you. And yet it was. And I don't need another testament to tell me. But this is what they teach. This is what they believe. Another place where it was written about the ensign, another paper they put out. The revelations will be open to them as no other in the history of the world. Into their hands now are placed the sticks of Joseph and of Judah. And they will develop a gospel scholarship beyond that which their forebears could achieve. And they will have the testimony that Jesus is the Christ and be competent to proclaim him and to defend him. And not with the scriptures, because you think my scriptures are not exactly right. That's why we have to have the Book of Mormon. But see, you're just going to be a better Christian. That's all. That's all we are. But what do we begin to see? We see inconsistencies with the text. Where do they get the idea that indeed Book of Mormon would be in place with anything connected with Joseph. Here's where they get it. In Alma, the 10th chapter and verse 3 in the Book of Mormon, Amenadi was a descendant of what? Of who? Nephi, or Nephi, but Nephi, what we hear it said, who was the son of Lehi, who came out of the land of Judah, who was a descendant of whom? Well, if you didn't know Mormon, you know, you can read, can't you? What do I have up there? Manasseh. Or did I write something different? He's a descendant of Manasseh, who was the son of Joseph, right? Is that true? Son of Joseph was Manasseh? What have they just done to you? They changed Ephraim with Manasseh, didn't they? And you're going to allow that. Son of Joseph, we don't have to get real close to that. When those are two distinct children of Joseph, and they said earlier when the president of the quorum of the apostles, they'll use Ephraim, and then they'll switch it on you. They'll switch it on you. It's a descendant of Manasseh. You've got to find some way to get Book of Nephi and their Mormon book to get that in connection with this prophecy they're going to fulfill. He was the son of Joseph who was sold into Egypt by the hands of his brethren. That's very true. That's very true. Just throw a little error in there and it's still going to be okay. No, it's contaminated. But that's what we see. So this descendant of Manasseh, that's as close as you're going to get with Joseph. And that allows us to put in the other stick is the Book of Mormon. I mean, I'd be embarrassed to make that argument. But Nephi, chapter 13 and verse 4, the angel said unto me, saying, the last records which thou hast seen among the Gentiles shall establish the truth of the first, which are the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Book of Mormon is going to complete the picture. That's why we have to have another gospel. So it's a very key prophecy of them to interject why you have to have, your own Bible says this, that you need to have the Book of Mormon, because it's going to complete the records of the apostles and the Lamb. And this I just bring you back to what the text says. I'll make them one stick and they shall be one in my hand. Ezekiel 37 and verse 19. Ephraim, which is the tribe, which is the kingdom. It is the kingdom of the north and the southern kingdom. They were divided. They're going to be one. Yeah, that's exactly logical from the Bible. But they are two kingdoms. Verse 19, it says, indeed, there shall be one in my hand. But what are these? They're not the Book of Mormon and the Old New Testaments. What are they? Read verse 22 with me. Verse 21, and it said to them, thus saith the Lord, behold, I take of the children of Israel from among the nations, whether they are gone, and they shall gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation upon the mountains of Israel. See, he'd been prophesying to the mountains of Israel, chapter 36. And here's where the people lived. And one king shall be king of them all, and they shall be no more two what? Two nations. Neither shall they be divided into what? Two kingdoms. Not books, but kingdoms. Anymore at all. And they're not going to defile themselves. So there's not, what I've thought is, you've got two books. You've got Old Testament, New Testament, and then you got the Book of Mormon. He didn't talk about three books. And Old Testament, New Testament, you put those together, but they're pretty separate. I got 400 years between the two. But it's how they ignore what is obvious, and you have to just kind of have to help them show that. And it's the stick of Ephraim for Joseph. Chapter 37:16. It's not for Joseph in the hand of Ephraim, in the hand of Manasseh. It's in the hand of Ephraim, because he was the leading tribe of the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. Fruitful. He was more fruitful, even though Manasseh was firstborn, which is amazing to me. Again, God's way of dealing with things and bringing about his will. But chapter 37 verse 16, is for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel and his companions. For Joseph, it's Ephraim. If Manasseh and Ephraim were same people, you might have something. Just call them a different name. Two distinct babies, two distinct brothers, two distinct people that would come from them. And so I realize we're not speaking about the book of Mormon completing the Old and New Testament, and now for just one, there's one testament of everything. No, we got one nation still. It started with the sticks. It continues on through verse 23 that we saw. And then he speaks about the king. Any questions or comments you'd like to make to that? That's one is, to me, is just outlandish, and they just say it with a straight face. And they don't seem to have a problem with it. And if you question them and say, well, I checked God, and he burned in my heart, and I think it's right. Question number 10. Who will be king over the united people? Not a book of man and God's word, and somehow Joseph Smith gets in here on the par with the scripture. But now they're going to be united people, and we're just asking who the king's going to be. So let's notice how he speaks of this. My servant David shall be king over them. Verse 24. Either you're going to have a literal view of that, David's going to come back, and we know he's in the grave in Acts 2. He's there, and he's still with us today, Peter says, so he hadn't resurrected somehow between the testaments. David's dead, but we're going to set him king over this one nation. And they shall all have one, and it's remarkable, have one what? Shepherd. King's going to be a shepherd. Well, that's David. Is it also Jesus? Got many people in another fold. There'll be one shepherd, one fold. That's Jesus, fulfilling that perfectly. And they shall also walk by my ordinances and observe my statutes and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I've given unto Jacob my servant, wherein your fathers dwell, and they shall dwell therein, and their children and children's children forever. And David my servant shall be their prince forever. Is Jesus a servant of God and a prince forever? With his kingdom there will be no end. Isaiah 9, Daniel 2. And when Acts 2, we'll find that when Peter, by inspiration, is preaching, he was promised that on the throne of David would sit one from his lineage. And Peter said, this is the Lord and Christ. This is Jesus whom you crucified. God made him both Lord and Christ. This Jesus whom you crucified. And he's going to be the king. His kingdom lasts forever. We know the end of time, he'll return the kingdom back to the Father. Harmonizing of the Scripture is so evident, and it's so, that's why contextual things help you with false teachers. They can't handle that. They have no answer to that. They say, well, that's your interpretation. Well, that's what the text says. Who gave you a right to interpret it another way that contradicts that? But that's not literal David, is it? And therefore you're weak, because you have to symbolize it. This whole book has a lot of things. We're even seeing things, we're going to see that God promises they come back to the land be greater than the Garden of Eden. It'd be like the Garden of Eden. And coming back from captivities, necessarily that's the Garden of Eden. But see, that was clean. They're purified. There are people now that's going to change their ways. God's cleansed them from their sin. 70 years, now they're back in their land. It's going to be fruitful. That's what Ezekiel has promised them, from hopeless, very dry bones to victory, and to be God's people. So I think Jesus is going to be that king. Now, we enter in anything in chapter 37. Now we read of just all of a sudden, the word of Jehovah came into me saying, Son of man, set thy face toward Gog. Apparently he's a ruler over a number of nationalities of people of the land of Magog, the prince or ruler of Rosh, Meshach, Tubal, and prophesy against them. There's your enemy of God. And so, where do we first read of Magog in the Bible? David?
Genesis 10, verse
Okay,
in the lineage of Jacob.
that's right. And he was of the lineage of Japheth. And when you look where those people dwelt, you can get a map. It'd be where Asia Minor and Russia. You're going way north, where those ancient peoples were. And so Ezekiel is just bringing out, and he speaks about here, the enemy will come from the isles, and from the north, and from the isles, there'll be the west, going west toward in the Mediterranean, and then to the you have the Persians to the east, and it's out there. God's people are being surrounded, and he uses this imagery of Gog against Magog, where he was. These are real places in ancient times. Genesis 10 introduces the land, and they would have rulers. I think this particular ruler he's speaking about here is Gog, but he's representing the enemies of God's people that indeed are going to come against God's people. Now, we've had the valley of dry bones. Now they're life. They're going to be God's people again in their land, and God will be. His name won't be profaned anymore, and we're going to see how he nails that in these 2 chapters. It's beautiful. When you look at it from the perspective of God, and you miss it if you don't, he just tells Israel, enemies of God, idolatrous nations, I'm God. And I've shown it both ways. I've shown it to Israel, you've been punished. You profaned my name by going after the idols, and the enemy of God that will come after all of this is indeed defeated as well. And that will bring an end to this idea of the land, the people, the enemy. And so what we see, that their place, if you look at a map, it'd be Asia Minor on up north. But as we see in the text, who joins them are people from the east and people from the west, with the isles and so forth. And it's just a picture of God's enemy. I mean, God's people being surrounded by an enemy of people that are trying to destroy them. Characterize God's people at the time when this Gog of Magog comes to conquer them. In question number 12. Give me a picture of what it looks like for the people of God at this time. What's that? Well, no, not this time. They've already gone into captivity. And these enemies are coming now after God's people are restored. They're not being idolatrous again. First of all, let me see, where did you get that? Well, yeah, that makes a difference. Okay. I'm going to be there with you in a minute, okay? I'm not there yet. 38 is that things are pretty good. Verse 10 says, Lord Jehovah says, shall come to pass in that day that things shall come into thy hand, and thou shalt devise an evil device. And thou shalt say, I'll go up to the land of unwalled villages. Now he's speaking, this is what God's going to do, G-O-G. He said, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. Why do we need walls right now in our country? Got to keep them out. We don't have walled villages because we don't have an enemy that's going to take us. And God sees that. He said, and I will go to them that are at rest, and that dwell securely. All of them dwelling without walls, having neither bars nor gates, to take the spoil and to take the prey, and to turn thy hand against the waste places that are now inhabited. God's people have come back. They have been disciplined. They've been cleansed. I don't see a picture here that when they came back from captivity, they were still idolatrous people. A new spirit had been put into them, and they had a heart of not stone, but a heart of flesh. We studied that as well. Well, I had a heart of the spirit. No, I had a heart of flesh. Well, that's a problem. No, it's not. It's a heart of men that had a heart of flesh that's still pliable and molded, and they've learned their lesson. They've learned that they loathed. We saw this last time. They loathed what they've done. when they realize this is the discipline they're having to go through. So they're changed. I wouldn't call them idolatrous people here, but they have been. And God has gone against them because of that. But he comes when they seem to be so vulnerable, they don't have any protection, and here's a nation with the power that he thinks he can conquer them. And that's going to be a problem for them. When God conquers Gog, how long will the fire last that burns their weapons? Now, have you prepared yourself for the battle? I wonder, I just wanted to struggle. Again, all of a sudden, you don't see that taking place. A battle here, a battle there. You see the result, just like that. Because this is not a problem with God. And verse 17, thus saith the Lord Jehovah, art thou he of whom I speak in old time, my servants the prophets that prophesied in those days? For many years will I bring thee against them, and it shall come to pass in that day when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Lord Jehovah, and my wrath shall come into my nostrils. For in my jealousy is the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel. All the fishes of the sea, all those things are going to happen. And I will call for a sword against him, and all the mountains, saith the Lord Jehovah. Every man's sword shall be against his brother. And with pestilence and with blood I will enter into judgment with him. He's going to be destroyed. And then we look at chapter 39 in verse 6. I will send a fire on Magog and on him that dwells securely in the isles, and they shall know that I am Jehovah. And my holy name will I make known in the midst of my people Israel. See, he's sending a message. He's going to take care of them in this battle. Neither will I suffer my holy name to be profaned anymore. And the nation shall know that I am Jehovah, the Holy One in Israel. Behold, it cometh, it shall be done, saith the Lord Jehovah. And this is the day whereof I have spoken. And so I said, all right. He promised all these things are going to happen. And then it happens. And he says, and they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth and shall make fires of the weapons and burn them, both the shields, the bucklers, the bows and arrows, the handstaves, the spears. They shall make fires of them for how many years? How long will the fire last that burns their weapons? 7 years. Well, 7 little years. Can you tell me a little about how the first year battle go? How did the third year go? Was it a problem in the fourth year? He didn't tell you. 7 years is the idea of a complete number. It's telling you how much of the army and the armor that the enemy had. They didn't have to get wood for 7 years. What did they burn? The weapons that were against them. So they shall take no wood out of the field. That's why I just said what I said. I didn't make that up. Neither cut down any of the forests, for they shall make the fires of the weapons, and they shall plunder those that plunder them. He's taken what the army went up against him, and I didn't get to see how the battle went. Just God's going to bring fire, and it's over. And that's all you need to know. God's stepped in. It shall come to pass in that day, verse 11, that I will give unto Gog a place for burial. Where? In Israel, the valley of them that pass through on the east of the sea, and shall stop them that pass through, and there they shall bury Gog and all his multitude, and they shall call it the valley of Hamagog, which means what? Valley of multitude, many people. He saw a valley of dry bones, many dry bones, Israel. He brought them back to life. But here was a multitude in the valley of Hamagog. And the 7 months shall the house of Israel be burying them, that they may cleanse the land. How many months? To bury the enemy. Did that literally happen? It didn't have to be. 7 months, 7 years. 7 years. It took that long to burn all the armor that was against them, 7 months it took for buried, and to cleanse the land. And you're going to see that they have to hire people in verse 14. Thank you. They shall set apart of continual employment. You want a job with the government? Here you go. We need somebody. And they shall pass through the land, and with them that pass through, those that buried them that remain upon the face of the land, to cleanse it after the end of 7 months, shall they search. So we're not intensified search now. Can we find any more bones that need to be buried? They shall pass the land and shall pass through. When they seeth any man's bone, then shall he set up a sign by it. Let's put a marker there. Till the buriers have buried it in the valley of Hamongog, and Hamonai shall also be the name of a city, and they shall cleanse the land. Defilement with the bones of an enemy, not one bone is left. The land is cleansed. And you don't know a lot of details about that multitude of armies that came down on people. They didn't even have a wall. Unwalled cities. They were at peace, not thinking anything like that could happen. And the greatest army you could ever imagine comes, and we see the outcome where God's name is honored, and he's no longer profaned in the eyes of the nations, because they just saw what he did to all the multitude of nations against his people when they were vulnerable. And who else could have saved them? God. And Israel had learned their lesson. That's why they got valley of very dry bones. How they ever going to come out of that? And this goes along, and this goes along. I know our time is short, but so this will stay with you. Come with me now to Revelation and see if this is not the same way that John portrays this. In Revelation, the 21st chapter, after the 1,000 years are over, verse 7. Well, that's the 1,000-year reign, man. That's the kingdom being set up. It's going to be great. Well, let's go past the 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are finished, Satan will be loosed out of his prison, and they shall come forward to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, north, east, west, come to the south, four corners of the earth. And he says, Gog and Magog, not Gog of Magog. He's just Gog and Magog. Here's a land, and here's a ruler. And there's other nations that are over. They have to gather for war, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. I know it took 7 years to burn all their armor. Sands of the sea. And they went up over the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about the beloved city. Why would they not have walls? Because it's a spiritual kingdom. And not literal city. And they're a beloved city. Fire came down out of heaven, devoured them. No battle emphasis here. No battle. It's just who won. And he devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast in the lake of fire and brimstone. That's the last he's going to do. So after God's people are restored in book of Revelation, the 325 AD, we find that nations of this earth, they got where they didn't persecute Christians. And Constantine, he claimed to be a Christian. Well, we're not going to kill Christians any longer. And so you didn't have that, what we have in the book of Revelation. But what John is reminding you, God's people, you're always going to be a target. And there'll come a time, whether that moment happens, it could happen because it's after we find the events of the first century. We could be in for a horrible persecution of God's people. We're not walled. We don't have gates. And God's people can face it. But what's the whole point? I don't care. You may look vulnerable. You may look like there's no way you could ever defeat that army. You can go to your death and you'll be victorious because he can't conquer that. And after that, what he said, till the end of time, God's people will be persecuted. Get ready for it. But they can't win over you. Even after the time where persecution on Christians were not happening, and we're in that time period where we haven't had that extensive persecution of Christians. We have it in different parts of the world. and you have it any time. Even after that, there'll be the battle of Gog and Magog. And dispensationalists, they don't ever say too much about this. They just, they make it all the one thing. These are two distinct, it's 1,000 years over. You've already had one battle. But God's people will be targets, but God will always win. And the final one is that the devil will not deceive anymore. He's cast in the lake of fire. And all of a sudden we find the final judgment, and we have the picture of heaven in chapter 21, when all this will end. And we know that Jesus is still going to be on this throne in the kingdom, because at the end, when Jesus comes back again to raise the dead and judge the world, he'll turn that kingdom back to God. Apparently he didn't lose it. And that could be centuries from now. But anytime we face those things, we can realize, I just want to be on the winning side. Who's winning side? Not Church of Christ, it's God. And I want to be in his body, and I want to be in the body that is trying to serve him. And that's what we keep trying to do. But that ought to give us a lot of confidence that we'll never be defeated, even if they take our lives. We will still win. And that's the encouragement that God's given people in Ezekiel's day. And we didn't get a chance to do it, but we'll sum up next time of how God addresses both as we get to the end of the 39th chapter, and then we'll start the final lesson number 9, with the last chapters. Any questions or comments you want to add before we close? Okay, thank you for being here and participating.